My name is Detective Michael. Henderson and I have been serving with the Los Angeles Police Department for 19 years. In nearly 2 decades of investigating crimes, I have encountered every type of criminal imaginable. But sometimes, you meet someone whose story forces you to confront uncomfortable truths about our justice system, the devastating consequences of false testimony, and what happens when an innocent person loses 15 years of their life to a crime they did not commit. This is the story that Daniel Carter told me 10 months ago, sitting in an interrogation room after being arrested for multiple counts of fraud, extortion, and witness tampering. When Daniel first began speaking, I expected to hear the usual excuses and justifications. Instead, I heard a confession that made me question everything I thought I knew about justice and revenge. Daniel Carter was 47 years old when he committed the crimes that brought him to my attention. But to understand why Daniel became a criminal, you have to understand what was done to him when he was just 27 years old and how 3 people destroyed his life with lies, told under oath in a courtroom. In 1999, Daniel Carter was living what most people would consider an ordinary middle-class American life. He worked as a mechanical engineer for an aerospace company in Pasadena, earning a comfortable salary that supported his wife, Rebecca, and their 2 young children, 7-year-old Michael and 5-year-old Sarah. They owned a modest 3-bedroom house in a safe neighborhood and were saving money for their children's college education. Daniel was not wealthy or particularly ambitious, but he was content with his life. He coached Michael's little league team, volunteered at Sarah's elementary school, and spent weekends working on home improvement projects with Rebecca. By all accounts, he was a devoted husband, loving father, and responsible member of his community. Detective Henderson Daniel said, his voice filled with pain that had not diminished despite the passage of years. I had everything that mattered to me. A wife who loved me, children who thought I was their hero, a job that challenged me, and a future that looked bright. And then 3 people I barely knew destroyed all of it with lies. The event that changed Daniel's life forever occurred on a Friday evening in March 1999. A man named Kevin Walsh was shot and killed during a robbery at a convenience store in Glendale. The murder occurred around 9 p.m., and the store's security camera had been vandalized earlier that day, so there was no video evidence of the crime. The only witnesses were 3 people who claimed to have been in or near the store at the time of the shooting. Their names were Marcus Thompson, Jennifer Davis, and Robert Chen. All 3 gave statements to police claiming that they had seen a man matching Daniel Carter's description shoot Kevin Walsh during an argument over money. Daniel had never met any of these 3 witnesses and had no connection to Kevin Walsh or the convenience store where the murder occurred. On the night of the murder, Daniel had been at home with his family watching a movie and helping Michael with a school project. Rebecca and the children all confirmed this alibi, but the prosecution argued that family members could not be considered reliable witnesses. The case against Daniel was built almost entirely on the testimony of Marcus, Jennifer, and Robert. All 3 identified Daniel in a police lineup, and all 3 testified in court that they were certain Daniel was the man they had seen shoot Kevin Walsh. There was no physical evidence linking Daniel to the crime. No murder weapon was ever found, and Daniel had no criminal record or history of violence. But the jury believed the 3 witnesses. After all, why would 3 unconnected people lie about seeing a murder? What possible motivation could they have for falsely accusing an innocent man? The jury deliberated for less than a day before returning a guilty verdict. Daniel was sentenced to 20 years in prison for second-degree murder. As he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, he looked back at Rebecca and his children and saw his entire world collapsing. His 7-year-old son was crying and asking why the police were taking Daddy away. His 5-year-old daughter did not understand what was happening and kept calling out for him to come home with them. Detective Henderson Daniel told me, his voice breaking, that was the last time I saw my children as a free man. The last image I have of them from before prison is Michael crying and Sarah confused and Rebecca trying to hold them both, while tears streamed down her face. Daniel was sent to California State Prison in Lancaster, where he would spend the next 15 years of his life. The adjustment to prison life was devastating for someone who had never been in trouble with the law and had no experience with the criminal justice system. Prison changed Daniel in ways that he could never have imagined. He had to learn how to survive in an environment where violence was common and trust was dangerous. He had to give up his identity as a husband, father, and engineer and become simply another inmate serving time for murder. The worst part was watching his family disintegrate from behind prison walls. Rebecca tried to maintain their marriage for the first 3 years, bringing Michael and Sarah to visit Daniel regularly and promising that they would be waiting for him when he was released. But the strain of raising 2 children alone, working full-time to pay the bills and dealing with the stigma of being married to a convicted murderer eventually became too much. Rebecca filed for divorce in 2002, citing the impossibility of maintaining a marriage when one spouse was serving a 20-year prison sentence. She moved to Arizona with the children to escape the shame and judgment they faced in Los Angeles. Daniel's children grew up with only vague memories of their father and the knowledge that he was in prison for murder. Daniel's parents visited him regularly for the first 5 years of his incarceration, but his father died of a heart attack in 2004 and his mother passed away from cancer in 2007. Daniel was not allowed to attend either funeral. He grieved for his parents alone in his prison cell, knowing that they had died, believing their son was a murderer. Detective Henderson Daniel said, "I lost everything that mattered to me because of those 3 lies. My wife, my children, my parents, my career, my freedom, my reputation. I spent 15 years in prison for a murder I did not commit while the real killer walked free in the 3. People who lied about me went on with their lives. But Daniel never gave up trying to prove his innocence. He spent countless hours in the prison law library, researching legal procedures and filing appeals. He wrote letters to innocence, projects and advocacy, organizations begging them to investigate his case. He submitted request after request for DNA, testing of evidence that had been collected from the crime scene. Most of his efforts were rejected or ignored. The legal system is not designed to easily overturn convictions, and there is a presumption that juries usually get it right. Daniel's claims of innocence were seen as the typical protests of a guilty man who refused to accept responsibility for his crime. But in 2010, Daniel finally got the breakthrough he had been desperately seeking. A new district attorney who was committed to reviewing potential wrongful conviction cases agreed to order DNA testing of blood evidence that had been found at the crime scene. The testing had not been done during the original investigation because DNA technology was less advanced in 1999, and the prosecution believed they had a strong case based on the eyewitness testimony. The DNA results were shocking and conclusive. The blood at the crime scene did not match Daniel Carter's DNA. Instead, it matched a man named Thomas Rivera, who had been convicted of multiple armed robberies and was currently serving time in a different California prison. Thomas had been arrested for an unrelated crime just weeks after. Kevin Walsh's murder and his DNA had been entered into the state database. Further investigation revealed that Thomas Rivera had confessed to killing Kevin Walsh during a botched robbery. He had never been charged with that murder because prosecutors believed they had already convicted the guilty party, Daniel Carter, based on the testimony of 3 supposedly credible witnesses. The revelation that Daniel was innocent triggered a legal process that moved with agonizing slowness. It took another 4 years of hearings, appeals, and legal arguments before Daniel's conviction was finally overturned in 2014. He was released from prison after serving 15 years for a murder he did not commit. Daniel walked out of prison at age 42 with $200 in gate money, a plastic bag containing his personal belongings, and no idea how to rebuild a life that had been destroyed by lies. He had missed his children's childhoods, his parents' final years, and 15 years of freedom that he could never get back. But Daniel's first priority was not mourning what he had lost. His first priority was finding out why Marcus Thompson, Jennifer Davis, and Robert Chen had lied about seeing him commit murder. He needed to understand what could motivate 3 people to destroy an innocent man's life with false testimony. What Daniel discovered through his own investigation shocked and enraged him even more than the original false accusations. Marcus, Jennifer, and Robert had not lied by mistake or because they genuinely believed Daniel was guilty. They had lied deliberately and knowingly in exchange for money and other benefits from people who wanted to see anyone convicted of Kevin Walsh's murder. Marcus Thompson had been facing drug charges at the time of the murder trial. He agreed to testify against Daniel in exchange for having his charges reduced and avoiding prison time. The prosecutor handling Daniel's case had arranged the deal in exchange for Marcus's testimony, even though Marcus had not actually witnessed the murder. Jennifer Davis had been paid $15,000 by Kevin Walsh's family, who were desperate to see someone punished for their loved one's death. Jennifer was struggling financially and saw the opportunity to make money by telling the jury what they wanted to hear. She had not been at the convenience store the night of the murder, but she convinced herself that lying was justified if it helped bring closure to a grieving family. Robert Chen had been promised immigration assistance for his family in China in exchange for his testimony. Robert had witnessed the murder, but the killer he actually saw was Thomas Rivera, not Daniel Carter. However, when police showed him a photo lineup and suggested that Daniel might be the man he saw, Robert went along with the identification because he was afraid of being deported and wanted to help his relatives immigrate to the United States. Detective Henderson. Daniel told me, his voice filled with cold rage. I spent 15 years in prison because 3 people decided that their own interests were more important than the truth. Marcus wanted to avoid prison for his drug charges. Jennifer wanted money. Robert wanted immigration help, and I paid the price for their selfishness and moral cowardice. Daniel's discovery of why Marcus, Jennifer, and Robert had lied transformed his grief and anger into something more dangerous and calculating. He decided that these 3 people needed to experience the same kind of devastation and loss that they had inflicted on him. They needed to understand what it felt like to have their lives destroyed by lies and betrayal. Daniel spent 6 months planning his revenge with the same meticulous attention to detail that he had once applied to engineering problems. He researched each of his 3 targets, learning about their current lives, their families, their jobs, and their vulnerabilities. He was patient and methodical because he understood that revenge would only be satisfying if it was comprehensive and devastating. Marcus Thompson had used the deal he received in exchange for his false testimony to avoid prison and had gone on to build a successful career as a real estate agent. He was married with 3 children, lived in an expensive house in Pasadena, and was active in his church and community. To all appearances, Marcus had put his criminal past behind him and was living the life of a respectable businessman. Jennifer Davis had used the money she received for her false testimony to start a small catering business which had grown into a profitable enterprise. She was divorced but maintained good relationships with her 2 adult children and was well regarded in her community as a successful entrepreneur who had overcome financial hardship. Robert Chen had successfully brought his family to the United States, and they had built a life in Los Angeles. Robert worked as an accountant. His children had attended good colleges, and he was seen as a pillar of the local Chinese-American community. He had never told his family about his role in Daniel's wrongful conviction. All 3 of Daniel's targets had moved on with their lives seemingly without guilt or remorse about what they had done to him. They had benefited from their false testimony and had never faced consequences for destroying an innocent man's life. Daniel decided that needed to change. He was going to make sure that Marcus, Jennifer, and Robert experienced the same kind of loss and devastation that he had endured. And unlike the false testimony that had convicted him, Daniel's revenge would be based on truth, exposing the lies that his 3 targets had built their lives upon. Daniel's revenge against Marcus Thompson began with a systematic investigation into every aspect of Marcus's real estate business. Daniel used his engineering background and the research skills he had developed in prison to uncover financial irregularities and fraudulent practices that Marcus had been engaging in for years. Marcus had built his real estate success partly through legitimate hard work, but also through practices that crossed ethical and legal boundaries. He had been inflating property values in appraisals, falsifying documents to help unqualified buyers obtain mortgages, and accepting kickbacks from mortgage brokers in exchange for steering clients to them. Daniel gathered comprehensive evidence of Marcus's illegal activities, creating a detailed file that documented years of fraud, But instead of immediately reporting Marcus to authorities, Daniel decided to use this information to destroy Marcus's life in a more personal and devastating way. Detective Henderson. Daniel told me, his voice cold and calculating. I wanted Marcus to experience the same kind of powerlessness I had felt when 3 liars destroyed my life. I wanted him to watch everything he had built collapse around him and know that it was happening because of lies, just like the lies he had told about me. Daniel created a false identity as a wealthy investor interested in purchasing multiple properties through Marcus's real estate agency. He scheduled meetings with Marcus and spent weeks building a relationship based on what appeared to be mutually beneficial business opportunities. Marcus was eager to work with this apparently wealthy client and shared confidential information about his business practices, financial situation, and personal life. Daniel used this information to gain access to Marcus's bank accounts, business records, and personal communications. Once Daniel had gathered everything he needed, he began the systematic destruction of Marcus's life. He anonymously reported Marcus's fraudulent real estate practices to the California Department of Real Estate, providing detailed evidence of every illegal transaction Marcus had engaged in over the past decade. The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Marcus's real estate license was suspended pending the outcome of criminal charges. His business collapsed as clients fled and partners distanced themselves from the scandal. Marcus faced multiple felony charges, including fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. But Daniel was not satisfied with just destroying Marcus's career. He wanted to destroy Marcus's personal life as well. Daniel contacted Marcus's wife anonymously and provided her with evidence that Marcus had been having affairs with clients and had hidden significant amounts of money in offshore accounts. Marcus's wife filed for divorce and took their 3 children with her. The divorce proceedings were contentious and expensive, draining what remained of Marcus's financial resources. Marcus went from being a successful real estate agent with a perfect family to being unemployed, under criminal investigation, and facing divorce proceedings. The final step in Marcus's destruction came when Daniel arranged for Marcus to know exactly who had orchestrated his downfall. Daniel sent Marcus a detailed letter explaining that he was the man Marcus had lied about in court 15 years earlier, and that everything Marcus was experiencing was justice for the false testimony that had stolen 15 years of Daniel's life. Marcus tried to reach out to Daniel to apologize and beg for mercy, but Daniel ignored all attempts at contact. He wanted Marcus to live with the consequences of his lies, just as Daniel had been forced to live with the consequences of Marcus's false testimony. Daniel's second target was Jennifer Davis, whose false testimony had been motivated by simple greed. Jennifer had used the money she received for lying in court to start her catering business, which had grown into a successful enterprise serving wealthy clients throughout Los Angeles. Daniel's investigation into Jennifer's business revealed that, like Marcus, she had engaged in various unethical and illegal practices to build her success. Jennifer had been underpaying employees, violating health and safety regulations, and evading taxes by keeping 2 sets of financial records. But Daniel's revenge against Jennifer was more personal and psychologically devastating than his attack on Marcus. Daniel knew that Jennifer's greatest pride was her reputation in the community and her relationship with her 2 adult children, who believed their mother was a self-made success story who had overcome financial hardship through hard work and determination. Daniel created a comprehensive dossier documenting not just Jennifer's current business crimes, but also the fact that she had committed perjury 15 years earlier by falsely testifying that she had witnessed a murder. The dossier included copies of the original trial transcripts, Jennifer's testimony, and evidence showing that she could not possibly have been at the convenience store on the night of the murder. Daniel also included documentation showing that Jennifer had been paid $15,000 by the victim's family in exchange for her testimony. This payment had not been disclosed during the trial and constituted witness tampering and obstruction of justice. Daniel sent copies of this dossier to the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office, the IRS, California's tax authorities, the health department, and most devastatingly to Jennifer's 2 adult children. He wanted Jennifer's children to know that their mother had built her business on blood money, earned by destroying an innocent man's life. The consequences for Jennifer were catastrophic. She was charged with perjury witness, tampering, obstruction of justice, tax evasion, and multiple health code violations. Her catering business was shut down, pending the criminal investigation, and her assets were frozen by the IRS. But the worst damage was to Jennifer's relationship with her children. Both of her adult children were horrified to learn what their mother had done and cut off contact with her. They had built their own lives and careers on values of honesty and integrity, and they could not reconcile those values with the knowledge that their mother had lied in court and destroyed an innocent man's life for money. Jennifer tried to explain and justify her actions, but her children wanted nothing to do with her. They testified against her during her trial, providing character testimony that destroyed any chance Jennifer had of receiving a lenient sentence. Jennifer was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. She lost her business, her reputation, and her relationship with her children. She would serve time in the same prison system where Daniel had spent 15 years for a crime he did not commit. Daniel's final target was Robert Chen, whose false testimony had been motivated by his desire to help his family immigrate to the United States. Of the 3 people who had lied about Daniel, Robert was the only one who had actually witnessed the murder, but he had identified the wrong man in the police lineup because he was afraid and wanted to cooperate with authorities. Daniel's investigation into Robert revealed that unlike Marcus and Jennifer, Robert had lived a relatively honest life since his false testimony. Robert had worked hard to support his family, had put his children through college, and was regarded as a respected member of his community. But Daniel could not forgive Robert's lie, no matter how sympathetic Robert's motivations might have been. Robert's false identification had been a key piece of evidence that convinced the jury of Daniel's guilt. Without Robert's testimony, the case against Daniel would have been much weaker. Daniel's revenge against Robert was focused on destroying Robert's reputation in the Chinese-American community, where he was seen as a model of successful immigration and family values. Daniel gathered evidence proving that Robert had committed perjury and had benefited from his false testimony by receiving immigration assistance for his relatives. Daniel provided this information to community leaders, journalists, and Robert's extended family. He wanted everyone who respected Robert to know that his success had been built on a foundation of lies and that he had destroyed an innocent man's life in exchange for personal benefits. The revelation was devastating for Robert's family. His children, who had always been proud of their father's accomplishments, were shocked and ashamed to learn what he had done. Robert's wife, who had not known about his role in Daniel's wrongful conviction, felt betrayed and questioned everything about their marriage. Robert faced criminal charges for perjury and faced the very real possibility of being deported despite having lived in the United States for over 20 years. His accounting license was revoked, his clients abandoned him, and his reputation in the community was completely destroyed. But the worst consequence for Robert was losing the respect of his children. They could not understand how their father, who had always taught them the importance of honesty and integrity, could have lied in court and destroyed an innocent man's life. Robert tried to explain that he had been afraid and confused and had only wanted to protect his family, but his children could not forgive him. They knew that their father's lie had cost Daniel 15 years of his life and had separated him from his own children for most of their childhood. Detective Henderson. Daniel told me after describing what he had done to all 3 of his targets. I wanted them to experience the same kind of loss that I had experienced. Marcus lost his career and family. Jennifer lost her business and her children. Robert lost his reputation and his family's respect. They all suffered because of their lies, just like I suffered because of their lies. But Daniel's revenge did not stop with destroying the lives of the 3 people who had testified against him. He also filed civil lawsuits against the Los Angeles Police Department, the District Attorney's Office, and the County of Los Angeles for wrongful conviction and malicious prosecution. The lawsuits were based on evidence that prosecutors and police had known or should have known that the testimony against Daniel was unreliable. They had failed to properly investigate Marcus's criminal background and his deal to avoid drug charges. They had failed to verify Jennifer's claim that she was at the convenience store on the night of the murder. They had failed to properly document Robert's initial description of the killer, which did not match Daniel's appearance. The civil litigation took years and cost the city millions of dollars in legal fees and eventually settlements. Daniel was awarded $6 million in compensation for his wrongful conviction, though no amount of money could truly compensate for 15 years of stolen freedom. Daniel used part of this settlement money to fund his campaign of revenge against Marcus, Jennifer, and Robert. He hired private investigators, forensic accountants, and lawyers to dig up evidence of their crimes and ensure that they faced maximum consequences for their actions. But the criminal charges that brought Daniel to my attention were not related to his investigations into the 3 witnesses who had lied about him. Those investigations had been conducted carefully and legally, even if their purpose had been revenge rather than justice. The charges against Daniel stemmed from what he did after successfully destroying Marcus, Jennifer, and Robert's lives. Daniel's thirst for revenge had not been satisfied by seeing his 3 targets suffer. He wanted them to experience the same specific deprivations that he had experienced during his 15 years in prison. Daniel began stalking Marcus, Jennifer, and Robert, monitoring their movements and planning ways to make their lives even more miserable. He sent them threatening letters describing in detail what he had endured in prison and suggesting that they deserved to experience the same suffering. He created fake social media accounts to harass them online, posting information about their crimes and ensuring that their reputations remained destroyed, even after they had been convicted and sentenced. He contacted their employers, their friends, and their family members to make sure that everyone knew what they had done. Most seriously, Daniel engaged in financial fraud by accessing their bank accounts and stealing what remained of their money. He justified this by calculating that they owed him restitution for the 15 years they had stolen from him and taking it directly rather than waiting for the court system to award it to him. It was these additional crimes, stalking, criminal threats, identity theft, and fraud that eventually led to Daniel's arrest. One of his targets, Robert, Chen, had reported the harassment and threats to police and investigators, had traced the criminal activity back to Daniel. Detective Henderson Daniel said during our final interview, people ask me if I regret what I did to Marcus, Jennifer, and Robert. The honest answer is no. They destroyed my life with their lies, and they deserve to face consequences for what they did to me. Daniel paused, looking at the interrogation room walls. But I do regret that I couldn't stop after exposing their crimes and seeing them convicted. I regret that my need for revenge became an obsession that drove me to commit new crimes. I spent 15 years in prison as an innocent man, and now I'm going back to prison as a guilty one. Daniel looked directly at me, his eyes still filled with the pain of his wrongful conviction. The difference is that this time I deserve to be here. I committed crimes, and I'm accepting responsibility for them. But at least this time I'm being punished for things I actually did rather than for lies other people told about me. As our interview concluded, I found myself grappling with questions that have no easy answers. Daniel Carter had committed serious crimes, including fraud, identity theft, stalking, and criminal threats. By any legal standard, he was a criminal who deserved to be punished for his actions. But Daniel had also been the victim of one of the worst injustices our legal system can inflict: wrongful conviction based on false testimony. He had lost 15 years of his life, his family, his parents, and his freedom because 3 people decided their own interests were more important than the truth. Daniel's trial became a media sensation, with public opinion sharply divided. Some people saw him as a victim who had been driven to crime by the trauma of wrongful conviction. Others saw him as a vengeful criminal who had taken the law into his own hands rather than accepting his compensation and moving on with his life. The prosecution argued that Daniel's crimes were inexcusable regardless of what had been done to him. They pointed out that he had already received justice through his exoneration and his $6 million settlement, and that his subsequent criminal behavior demonstrated that he was dangerous and needed to be imprisoned. The defense argued that Daniel's psychological trauma from 15 years of wrongful imprisonment had left him unable to let go of his rage and that his crimes should be understood in the context of that trauma. They requested leniency and mental health treatment rather than a lengthy prison sentence. The jury convicted Daniel on multiple counts, and the judge sentenced him to 7 years in prison. It was a relatively lenient sentence, given the seriousness of his crimes. But the judge acknowledged that Daniel's wrongful conviction was a significant mitigating factor. Daniel Carter sits in prison, today serving a 7-year sentence for crimes he committed in pursuit of revenge against the people who stole 15 years of his life. He spends his days writing letters to innocence projects and advocacy, organizations urging them to investigate cases of potential wrongful conviction based on questionable eyewitness testimony. Marcus Thompson, Jennifer Davis, and Robert Chen are all also serving prison sentences for their roles in Daniel's wrongful conviction. They will spend years behind bars paying for the lies they told decades earlier. The case of Daniel Carter serves as a stark reminder of how devastating false testimony can be and how difficult it is for our justice system to correct its mistakes. Sometimes innocent people are convicted based on lies, and sometimes those lies destroy not just one life but many lives. Sometimes the victims of injustice become perpetrators, themselves driven by rage and trauma to commit crimes in pursuit of revenge. And sometimes the price of lies told in a courtroom echoes through decades, destroying everyone involved.